Why is it so important to embed sustainability within, the fashion and design curriculum for this next generation of, designers?
I think what's important about all the conversation today is that we are educating and preparing the next generation of the leaders of all these companies and all these practices. And we open the conversation, but they come to the table. These young people today really have such a keen awareness. It's a different moment in history. I mean, I don't know that it's fair to say it's been slow, because it's a process. You see it in various ways that people have to adjust their lives. So what gives me hope is that we will take the enthusiasm and the motivation and the interest that these young people have, and we will help them to understand the various levels of business that we talked about earlier. I mean, it really does have to be all part of a whole, and it's got to be in our curriculum, and it's got to be touching on both design and business and the environment and the impact and the overall sociocultural effect of design and fashion.
So we've talked about, individuals and the power at the community level. Saad, how do you motivate big companies with super large platforms to get involved in this conversation around sustainability?
I also tell companies a lot that whether you want to change or not, you have to. Because the reality of the situation is climate change is occurring. And so there is the ability to prepare in advance and to help communities, particularly communities of color all across the world, and prevent them from suffering immense loss and damage. There is also a world in which we act retroactively. We let people die. We let land be lost. We see people suffer. And we are right now at a point where we're able to make those choices. What world do we want to enter? And so I think that companies have a need to take action now, as well as the fact that, I think policies are already being implemented. They're already on the table, whether it be the Fashion Act or Fabric Act here in the United States, or the new sustainability regulations that are popping up in Europe. Companies are gonna have to change. And so there either is the reality that they can do it in advance and be seen as a leader, or be struggling to catch up and become irrelevant to the new consumer dynamics and the new reality of our planet that we're facing right now.
We also know, speaking of climate change, that sustainability and climate change are linked. That's, a fact. Sometimes these communities are not speaking with one another. How can we, mentor these separate communities to come together to really forge, the way forward?
I think the key and the name of the game here is intersectionality. It is understanding that each of these things don't exist in silos, right? I think there's the reality that there are all these inputs into fashion that directly impact our climate, whether that be land use, whether that be agriculture, as well as the outputs of the fashion industry, including the physical waste of the whole system, as well as the carbon outputs, et cetera, that we see. So in many ways, I think that when we're talking about fashion, we're also having a conversation about climate. It's just we have been taught to think of these things as separate, and that, I think a climate activist versus a fashion activist, to me, what's the difference? Probably just the outfit. And so I think that as we have these conversations about how they're related, it's the reality that the fashion industry is expected to grow by about 63% by 2030. Now, for a company, that sounds great. However, for a global reality of the climate crisis, where the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, tells us that we need to reduce our emissions in half in that same time frame, now you have a contradiction. Now you have a conversation, and now you have a need for these companies to bring real solutions to the table so as to not compromise the reality of the planet that we're living in.
Going off of that, how has, education kind of evolved and changed in your years working with, in the fashion sector?
I keep saying you shouldn't make any decisions anywhere without a 20-something in the room. Because I really do think the thought process is different, the recognition, the awareness. And we've started a whole new area that we call biodesign, where you have the scientists and the designers. And for the most part, what they're doing is they're developing new and natural kinds of textiles.
In the beauty and also, the food world, there's been a call for so much transparency. I don't think fashion has really caught up so much yet. How do you, empower people to ask hard questions about the clothes they're wearing or what they're consuming and purchasing, as an activist and a mentor?
I think that, when it comes to the industries of food or beauty, it's something that I think we more directly understand as I'm putting this on my body, I'm putting this in my body. And so there's this inherent desire to be more aware about what chemicals those things are composed of. Clothes are the same thing. And so when we are having these conversations in the fashion industry, I think it's really important that we recognize that paradigm. And when we're talking about mentorship, I think that it's so essential to have sort of intergenerational dialogues, because I think that there's so much wisdom that we stand to gain from listening to older generations.
I think the whole notion of mentoring and the mindset of mentoring, what is it? It's a collaboration. It's not an instruction. It's a respectful relationship where everybody learns a little something from each other. And, the whole notion of teamwork, you see it in successful businesses. We try and develop that in the academic models because that's what we're sending students out into. But, I think there are two things. One, I think the whole collaboration, the team, the listening respectfully and incorporating those ideas into what we put out as reflective of the times we live in and what we think will be successful. But the other thing I think I would like to say is the whole notion of the speed with which these things can happen. If you think back, the whole farm to table, the whole natural ingredients in food and not having additives. If you think back to beauty and the packaging and the ingredients, these things all took time, and we're talking about them now as if, that it's just part of the norm. I think the same thing is happening with fashion. I think the whole awareness of the production, the use of textile, the use of water, the use of dyes, all of those things that are important to young people are happening, and they're happening at the pace that we can produce something for that informed, empowered consumer to purchase. But it's all changing, I think if we have this conversation, somebody asked before about 5 years from now, I think it's going to be a different conversation.
I have to ask you both, what makes you optimistic about the future of fashion?
I think I'm someone who approaches these issues knowing that they can change because they have to, but because I know that we can make them change. Just the week before last week, I was with thousands of climate strikers marching through New York, taking over the Brooklyn Bridge, and demanding larger, substantial structural changes. And when I see that type of energy and that type of tenacity from people to actually get out in the streets and organize and mobilize en masse, I know change can happen. I know change is coming, and we're here to deliver it. And every single institution, whether it is a company, a government, a university, I think they're all starting to understand, and some have understood for a long time, the need and ability and influence that they have. And so that's what gives me hope, is knowing that people are already on it and change is on the way.